Good morning, my friends. We're going to be starting a new subject today, and I decided to work with this little book of Swami Kriyananda's called Money Magnetism, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it in a few minutes. So let's start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dear friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to be in tune with your presence. Awaken us to your inner guidance. Fill our sight with your brilliant light of goodness and kindness and love, that we may follow the path that you lay before us to our home in infinite joy. Om. Peace. Amen. Yes, for a moment I didn't know if I had my microphone on, but I'm sure one of my intrepid friends here would have told me if I hadn't. I had made a resolution that every Monday I would remind you all that if you would like to support the work that I'm doing for spreading the mission of the Masters, I have an account now with Patreon. Patreon is this innovative way for creative people to be supported by those who support their cause. Also, if you care to make a donation in another way, either to Ananda Palo Alto, which supports everything I do, or a designated donation through Ananda Palo Alto for Asha's work, the mission of the Masters, I'd be very grateful. People have been very generous and we're doing very well, but the work has expanded to the point where I have to have a paid staff, so that's entirely and only why I'm asking for your support. So I finished last week how to live intuitively, and I was facing the dilemma of what to do next. I've enjoyed very much having some text of Swamiji's to work from one way or another. For living intuitively, it was notes from a class he gave decades ago, and just trying to think what was a very relevant topic. And I remembered this little book. I don't know if this is a current cover because I buy these books when they first come out, and then I don't necessarily replace them. It's a very small book, and it's how to attract what you need when you need it. Originally, it was called How to Use Money for Your Own Highest Good, which was also another title. It's subsequently been overwhelmed by two other courses that Swami has created on the subject of prosperity in general. The first one is called Material Success and Happiness Through Yoga Principles. And that is a humongous work. It's 26 lessons. It was originally intended as a correspondence course, a study course. It's subsequently been published in 2 volumes. It's absolutely life-changing. I gave a very long class series on that book a few years ago. It's only audio. It's not video. It might be on YouTube as an audio. It might be on podcast as an audio. It's definitely on Ananda Palo Alto under the book study section. So it's not that hard to find. Material Success Through Yoga Principles. I loved giving it. It was completely innovative for me when I really read that course, which is immensely challenging. Not because it's complex in the writing, but because the concepts are so elevated. I'll speak a little bit about that course because it applies here also. When Swamiji wrote that course in India, right after he moved there in 2004, he had a trip to the hospital. He had multiple trips to the hospital because he started working the karma of the situation out through his body almost immediately. And he was in the hospital. He had double pneumonia. He was barely conscious. And the doctor came in and asked for Swami's advice. Swami laughed. He said, usually the doctor says, what can I do for you? But in this case, the doctor said, I need something from you. And the doctor talked about the fact that he had a son in Canada who was going to school. He had many expenses, and it was very hard to always be strictly dharmic because the pressure for money was very great. And unfortunately, there was an expectation that you would sort of pad the bills a little bit. And as Swami put it, he could see what a terrible conflict the man was having because he was fundamentally deeply honest. But he had responsibilities, and he was caught up in the system. I dare say, I think India's been really clarifying and elevating their way of doing business. But it's been an unfortunate habit in that country that not everything is above board. But Swami saw the terrible dilemma the man was facing between what he knew was honorable and what he needed to do for his son, especially. So Swami saw this tremendous need to write a very comprehensive guideline, because where there is dharma, there is victory. And Swami himself knew that that dharma is the way to accomplish everything that you want to accomplish. So even from his sickbed, Keshava Taylor lived in India, and Keshava had been Swami's secretary for many years, and he had Keshava come over to the hospital room, and he dictated the whole outline for the course, and then began to outline some of the lessons, and then spent a little more than a year after that creating the course. The difficulty is it's not in print in America. You have to buy it from India, but Crystal Clarity in America I think is going to begin importing the books. And there's also Swami himself made an audio book of that course. I'm telling you all these things. It's not even the class I'm teaching, but I'm just giving you an idea of how much energy Swami put into this subject of material success. And as it happened, when I would go over to India during the years that Swami lived there, I would go for a few weeks every once in a while. They would always put me to work one way or another. And one of the times they put me to work, it was helping to write promotion for that course. And this is main reason why I'm talking to you about this. There are a number of prosperity courses, and at that time there were quite a few that were very well known, some very well known names who taught the rules of prosperity. And so people would sometimes ask for me, what's the difference between your course and this well-known one and this well-known one? Swami's answer was fascinating. Swami's answer was, I am the disciple of a great master. And that isn't the answer you'd expect. You'd expect an answer that had to do with the techniques that he offered, or the affirmations, or the methods, or something. His answer was, I am a disciple of a great master. Swami rarely spoke in koans, but when he did, you always had to really stop and think about it. So I tried to contemplate why Swami thought was the answer. And this is the ideas that I came up with, that Swamiji approved afterwards, was most people try to manipulate the material plane from the perspective of the material plane, which is, this is the world we live in, these are the rules of how it works in the material world, let's just move the pieces around. And you can have a lot of success that way. You can determine sort of what's going on here, and then you can calculate it. This kind of thinking leads to what was a best-selling book decades ago. It was called Looking Out for Number One. And it leads to things like, don't ever do anything unless there's something in it for you. Techniques of negotiating, how to be tough, all these things, those are all valid things to learn. Swami himself was actually an expert negotiator, but he did it not from the point of view of the ego. So what we started writing to describe this course, I don't know if any of it's still used, because this was a long time ago. India used to be the most wealthy country in the world. When Marco Polo, I believe, and other early world travelers would go, they were just stunned by the all-pervasive wealth of India, and by how generously that wealth was shared with all. And then, of course, that wealth attracted attention, and gradually the Western world started invading India, and invading not necessarily with warlike energy, but just coming in. Gradually, England established itself as having a monopoly on the trade with India. And gradually, India's India's wealth began to shrink and England's wealth began to grow. Even some of the crown jewels of the English crown literally were pried out of the walls of the Taj Mahal. But the real wealth of India was not jewels and gold, although apparently they had it in abundance just a number of centuries ago, not that long ago. But their real wealth has always been that they understand the spiritual world. Master called India the guru of the globe. And Swami often repeated that India is the guru of the whole world because of the unbroken tradition of spiritual understanding. India is the only continuous culture on the planet. Every other great civilization has been interrupted. India has risen and fallen, but it's been one consistent culture for as far back as anybody can know. The Vedas, the Upanishads, the ancient sages, the practice of yoga, continuously inhabited cities that have always been following Sanatana Dharma, which is the higher laws that rule this planet, of which, self-realization is the English word to express that. And our path through this line of gurus is a direct expression, a new expression, but a true ancient expression also of Sanatana Dharma. So when the British came and began to take the wealth of the country, basically the true wealth of India was hidden. And it was hidden in the Himalayas among the masters. And India went through the period of being subjugated. But then starting in 1948, which was not that long ago, threw off that colonial yoke and began to be its own country again. And prosperity has been returning and so on. And so the principles that were always the secret of India's power have begun to just come back into the everyday world. And Master Paramahansa Yogananda was a prime example of that. His book, Autobiography of a Yogi, is one of the most consistently best-selling books, spiritual autobiographies of all time. And interestingly, his original title for this was Yogi Christ of India. And it is about the Yogi Christ of India, that this was deemed to be a more accessible title. So coming all the way back to Swami's Material Success Course, the secret of what Swami has written, I am the disciple of a great master, is that the material world can be manipulated from the material plane, but the real power that runs the material world is from a higher level of consciousness. From the spiritual plane is how the material plane can really be affected. And through Kali Yuga, which is the age of matter that we're just moving out of, the way Master explains it, the general level of civilization and human consciousness was not able to hold the whole picture of reality. There's the material world and then there's the spiritual world. And even though in truth they're an integrated reality, they appear to be separate. So it was the guiding wisdom of the true rulers of this planet, which are the great masters in the Himalayas and the masters in the astral world, who are guiding civilization. Swami writes about this. I refer to it continuously. Swami writes about it in The New Path. Master writes about it in Autobiography of Yogi. Babaji and Jesus together are concerned about the direction of civilization and have planned the salvation of this age. Swami writes about it in The New Path, about how we think that presidents and prime ministers are running the world, but really it's these great spiritual nations guided by these great gurus working through those either saints or just ordinary devotees like us who are striving to be instruments of that reality. So it was the guidance of the masters through Kali Yuga that the material and the spiritual world, that India would specialize in maintaining awareness of spiritual truth, and the West, especially America, would specialize in how to work in a practical way with the material world. And so India became impoverished, but the spiritual wealth remained. America, which was founded for spiritual principles and has a very high spiritual destiny, but it would specialize in material success. So America became wealthier and wealthier, but as we have become more wealthy, we have moved farther and farther away from Sanatan Dharma. We've become fanatical about religion in certain ways, or just atheistic and indifferent. A tremendous number of the difficulties in our society, especially among the youth, is because we have gradually, in the name of freedom of religion, we have gradually given ascendancy to atheism, which is why the religious fanatics are so intent, to push their agenda back in. And I sympathize. I'm not sympathetic with their fanatical agenda, but I'm sympathetic with the absence of spiritual understanding and with the attitude almost that spiritual understanding is the enemy and must be suppressed. And we are suffering. We will suffer, and we will suffer more as a result of that. But we are also moving into a new age. And so the masters have said that in the new age, because there's, and this is all written in the book called The Yugas by David Steinmetz and Joseph Selby. The general understanding of mankind will increase to the point where the material and the spiritual will reunite, because they really are just one reality. There's only one reality. And this apparent separation is an illusion. It's an illusion caused by sinking consciousness. So it's been thought that either you live in the world or you live in the monastery. Either you live comfortably and have wealth, but then you're materialistic, and then if you're spiritual, you have to be very, very poor. I remember at the point at Ananda village in the early 80s, when Swamiji wanted me to live next door to him at Ayodhya, but in order to do that, I had to build a house, a small house, because there was no place to live. And it was completely confusing me how I could have a house. And I really began to realize that I had this deep belief that as long as I was poor, I was spiritual. But if in any way I became comfortable financially or physically, then my spiritual life was in jeopardy. Now, that's not how Master lived, and that's not how Swami lived. But I had that Kali Yuga idea really deep in my awareness, and I had to really face into it and begin to change and begin to understand. So we're all sort of moving through this, and now we're moving into an age, and this is why Master said that the future of the planet is that India and America are gradually going to come together. And Master said after some tumultuous times, he said India and America will unite to lead the world, because India brings the spiritual, America has the practical efficiency, and when the two are united, that's when the power comes. And it's because we're moving into a higher age. This is part of Babaji and Jesus. And that's why it's no accident that Master started self-realization in America. This was not like just a random choice. I even go so far back as to say I asked Swami about this, because America's only a couple of 100 years old, and this, this cycle of development is a very long one. I mean, even the interwoven between Master's previous incarnations and America are very interesting. Master was William the Conqueror, Swami and Master together. There's a book called 2 Souls, 4 Lives. I'm going to look back here and see if I have it, but I don't think I do. No, I don't have a copy here. 2 Souls, 4 Lives. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's about Master and Swami Kriyananda and William the Conqueror and his son Henry. Because Master said he was William and Swami believes he was Henry. There's not much doubt about it. It's true. And William really created the country of England, but it was Henry, his son, who came after him, who just like Swami did in this life, who just sort of brought it all into clear manifestation. And much of the system of law and the rights of the citizens, all of these different things, it was starting with William and then Henry that these things came into being. Then America was founded from England primarily, and many of those principles of the rights of the individuals came from that incarnation. Now, I'm just going to add another, something I found out only a few years ago. Master also said he was a Spanish king, and who fought to keep Spain Catholic, just to keep the teachings of Jesus there instead of having the teachings of the Moors come in, and he drove the Moors out of Spain. After some research, Swami became convinced he was Ferdinand III. Master was Ferdinand III. He was called Ferdinand the Saint, I think, actually. And the entire incarnation of Ferdinand was at war, keeping the Moors, keeping Spain safe for the teachings of Jesus, which are the teachings of Sanatana Dharma. The Catholic Church was the expression at the time. Again, Swami was Yogananda's son. He was Alfonso X. And again, he did exactly the same as he had done as Henry. He created a system for everything that Ferdinand started. Alfonso organized, confirmed, and set in place. And he also, again, in that case, he set up a system of law and justice. That's the same thing Henry did. The rule of law came in with Henry and came in with Alfonso X. Spain colonized a great deal of America, especially the Southwest. And they brought with them the system of Spanish law that Alfonso X had created. And when the United States was formed, the system of law that was operative in the Southwest was to a large extent adopted by the new United States. So much so that there is a portrait of Alfonso X hanging in the Congressional Hall where the representatives meet, because the founding fathers knew that they owed a debt to that cycle of time. I mean, it's just like I've been doing something lately that I found extremely helpful. It's a mental game, but it's very interesting. I'm living my life now with trying to have the attitude of how this is going to read as history 50 years from now. If I were reading the history of these events, I would consider, I would know the end of the story. And I would know that, something always happens. And it either works out well or it doesn't work out well. But it's always an adventure, and then life goes on. Whereas when we're in it, we have this sort of white-knuckled feeling that if something happens, it's going to be somehow catastrophic. But even if it's catastrophic, time passes, something happens again, and it all resolves itself. So I'm fascinated just to see how all of this energy flows together. I asked Swamiji, I said, did our masters found America? The founding fathers, George Washington very notably, but all the founding fathers had a profound sense of divine destiny. And what they did was really incredibly presumptuous, and there was no apparent reason why the American Revolution should have succeeded. But the key players in that felt a divine destiny behind their actions. And that divine destiny gave them a magnetism and a power that overcame the obvious physical obstacles. And in the end, they triumphed, and because that's how they felt about it. Where did that power come from? Who were them? Swamiji never answered me. He the only time he ever really brought it up, there was a group of us, it might have been when we were on holiday in Goa, because it was a big table. And Swami said something like, and I'd been reading a lot about the American Revolution, and I felt a lot of attunement with it. I historically have a revolutionary's zeal for these sorts of things. So it would not be surprising. And stories of faith and heroism and meeting great challenges are always inspiring. So I was very inspired by it and felt a certain attunement with it. So I just talked to Swami and asked him those questions, but he was equivocal. He wouldn't answer. But he said to the whole table, Asha thinks she might have been part of the American Revolution. How do others feel? And we just sort of had a discussion back and forth without it being definitive. It was sort of a bit unusual for Swami to be neutral like that and just put the thought out without himself taking a stand, which he never did on it. He never gave me the satisfaction of confirming or denying what I was suggesting. But he did see that it was self-evident because America is a Dwapara Yuga country. And so Dwapara Yuga means it's based on the principles of the coming age. And we ourselves, and I've talked about this when I've been talking about current events in the last few weeks, we ourselves as a country have yet to fulfill our own destiny. So all of this, is what turns out to be a very long introduction for what I'm going to talk about in the coming several weeks. But it is really the background story here, which is why is Swami's teaching on prosperity different than the average? Because he's the disciple of a great master. So what he's trying to bring in with the giant Material Success course and this little tiny book, which he wrote many years earlier. And then there's a third item, which is called Akash, which is a sort of in size and scope somewhere between the two, but I'm not going to go there for the moment. Just trying to orient us. Yes, I know what I'm trying to say. So when we think about money, we of course think that I need it. I mean, I started this out because it's Money Monday, which is how I'm defining it in my own mind, that I'm reminding you that, guess what? I also need money at this point. And the nature of the work that I'm doing is that it's on behalf of a greater cause. And therefore, those of you who are inspired by that greater cause, you can support the prow of the ship in this case, which just happens to be my voice and my face. But it's because of what's coming behind it. It's not an end in itself. But that being said, everything that Swami's teaching about material success and money magnetism, which is why the Material Success course is so, I want to use the phrase mind-blowing, but that's not really a very dignified phrase for something so important. But it blows the edges out of the way we think about these things. Because we're not merely just trying to get money for ourselves, because we're trying to. Everybody has to. Master himself said, he said several things about money. Making money honestly and industriously, he might have even said to support a noble cause, but I'm not sure, is the next greatest art to realizing God. It was very interesting, and we can explore that as we go along. And then he also said, Master said, every good, noble, or philanthropic work sooner or later comes down to a matter of money. So he was very realistic, Master was, because money is money is the materialized expression of energy. So it would be just as true to every good, noble, or philanthropic work comes down to a matter of energy. But the form that energy takes is we have to be able to magnetize the resources in order to manifest what we're wanting to do. And that is a spiritual skill. It's not a materialistic skill. It's only in Kali Yuga, when everything's gotten so confused, and when materialism and greed has crept into the equation, that all of a sudden manifesting money becomes something separate than manifesting spiritual truth. But the fact of the matter is, it's all energy, and it's all energy directed by attunement and devotion and willpower for an appropriate end. And that, of course, is what we're going to talk about, an appropriate end, not merely accumulating. And in fact, the entire point, which apparently I'm going to talk about tomorrow, is that if our concept is to accumulate, we've already broken the magnetism. So the way we're going to approach it is as a spiritual skill. How can the acquisition of material resources actually be the development of our spiritual ability? And this is where India and America, starting with Swami Kriyananda's work, with Master's incarnation and Swami Kriyananda's efforts to make that idealism practical and accessible, that's what we're going to be talking about. So, my friends, we'll continue tomorrow.